Hey guys, what's up? Sando here. I'm back, I'm feeling much better now, meaning that I'm ready to film some new gear reviews, and I decided to kickstart with a loudspeaker review. So what you're looking at is a massive, huge bookshelf loudspeaker that uses ceramic/aluminum tweeters and woofers. It's slightly leaned back a little bit, so that improves the waveguide control and slightly disperses the sound. On their back you can see a huge 8-inch passive radiator that improves their low-end delivery and of course the extension of the sub bass. They are called Sound of Eden Crescendo UNO and they are going for 2,200 euros. But at the end of this video I have a little surprise for you, so maybe you can get them at a nice discount. Until that happens, let's check them out. Build quality wise, their fit and finish is excellent. They used thicker MDF boards for a better dampening. Please don't get befooled by the bookshelf moniker, as in reality these are bigger to all my former bookshelves. If you put them sideways, you can clearly see that their cabinet is leaning backwards, creating their unique look. It was done on purpose for a better waveguide control that will disperse the sounds around the room, for a bigger stage size and for a nicer depth. It was a surprising top-class Transient terminals that are usually reserved for much costlier speakers. You can spot a massive passive radiator that in fact is much bigger to the woofer, that is making them sound bigger, giving a huge helping hand with the low-end punch and extension. Weighing 12 kilos apiece, please make sure you have the right speaker stands to accommodate them and leave at least half a meter behind them for a clearer bottom end. As for tech inside them, they use some special medium-sized 6-inch woofers, but what's so special about them, you might ask? They have an aluminum cast chassis for optimum strength and for low compression, plus a reinforced ceramic cone that optimizes its pistonic operation. Damping rubber surrounds it, improving its operation and of course transit response. A non-conductive fiberglass voice coil was used for minimum damping. This particular driver can reach as low as 29 Hz at -5 dB and will easily play 40 Hz notes without dropping a single dB, and that's quite impressive. Their tweeters are using absolutely the same materials, more exactly an aluminum/ceramic dome with a copper cap on top that reduces voice call inductance. Their crossover point sits at 2.2 kHz, after which both their tweeters and woofers are working as a single driver. Thanks to their leaned back cabinet and passive radiator, the sounds would bounce off your walls, coming from different angles and not only from the speakers themselves. There isn't a sweet spot anymore and you can listen to them sitting anywhere in the room. Alright guys, I'm ready for some music, so let's hit some eardrums. I will start with system matching, as having a sensitivity of 86 dB you'll need some very serious power to unleash the maximum potential of these two loudspeakers. So I started with some small, some very affordable units like SMSL DA9 that is providing 90 watts in 4 ohms and it's working in Class D. But something wasn't just clicking into place with that amplifier, so there was something gravely missing from my music, and that was sub bass, that was transit response, that was bass slam, nothing like that. So it was just shy sounding, very polite sounding, and these two loudspeakers were sending it into clipping territory with some high dynamic range tracks, so that wasn't a very good amplifier. Its bigger brother SMSL SA400 was a much better amplifier, so I had a much bigger headroom, I could play much louder if I wanted. Finally, some bass kick returned home, so I felt it in my chest. That was a much nicer. It sounded just faster, more impactful, slightly more warmer in a way. But I disliked that its signal-to-noise ratio wasn't that impressive, so its detail retrieval was just okay. It didn't sound so clean as the amplifiers that followed sounded. So later on, I tried Barson Timekeeper 3i that sounded just much better to those two SMSL units. So finally, a lot more bass returned home, and it was not only the quantity-wise, but also quality-wise, it was much cleaner sounding. So I was just hearing layers and layers of sub-bass. That was quite unusual. It sounded faster, it sounded more impressive in the transit response, and finally the voices sounded more organic, so more lifelike. It was both more warmer sounding and clearer sounding in the same way. So I believe that that one sounded like a proper integrated amplifier, and I could easily live with that one and with these loudspeakers any time of the day. Later on, I've tried my daily driver KeyChess S300 that sincerely sounded very close to the Barson, even if it's considerably more expensive and it's only a power amplifier, so we'll need a preamplifier to drive these loudspeakers. So it sounded just a little bit clearer and a little bit meaner, more impactful, so it put a little bit more meat on the bone because the very first watts are being delivered in Class A, and that made them a little meaner sounding in a way. Later on, they suggested trying a Hypex NC 1200 amplifier that is providing some mind-boggling 700 watts in 4 ohms. That's a lot of power, I replied back, but I winked and smiled back that I have something better. And those are two AHB2 amplifiers by Benchmark that are providing some 740 watts in 4 ohms. So that is slightly more, but those sounded much better to anything I've heard up to this point. So those are my thunder bringers, dopamine injectors, those are my heavyweight boxers, and sometimes I'm feeling like they're punching bag. So I'm very, I can easily say that with those amplifiers I finally unleashed the maximum potential of these two loudspeakers. So everything, detail retrieval, speed, transient response, cleanness, everything was just improved to unrecognizable. They sounded just much bigger. They didn't sound like bookshelf loudspeakers, more like a medium-sized stand floor in a way, and that was quite impressive. As for their sound signature, I find them highly engaging, so very impactful sounding, even if jazz and blues is part of your daily diet. So there is a sense of greatness, of spaciousness, that everything happens exactly at the right time, exactly at the right place in the listening room. So I find them also very fast sounding, so they are very impressive in terms of transient response. They have natural decays, they have a great sense of pace, rhythm and timing. And while there are many other warmer or smoother sounding loudspeakers out there, I believe that Crescendo UNO wants to be remembered as very honest sounding loudspeaker to their core. So never staying in front of the musical signal and just preserving the source material as much as possible. If you power them with a very potent, with a very powerful amplifier, or two amplifiers in my case that are providing a huge headroom on top, just prepare for a physical manifestation of the bass, so you'll feel that with your chest, all that bass information. While UNO is indeed a two-way loudspeaker that is relying quite a lot on those two 6-inch woofers, I believe that the cherry on top are its passive radiators on the back that are improving the low-end delivery, that are adding more air in the room, making you feel that you are listening to a much bigger enclosure, like a medium-sized stand floor loudspeaker. With this pair, everything felt big sounding, but most importantly, I wasn't shackled to that sweet spot anymore, so I didn't need to stay exactly in the middle of my couch for the best sound possible. I could move around my couch and I would get exactly the same experience, so a big sound, a very deep sound that is fun and engaging to listen to. I had a very similar experience with a pair of Buchard S400 loudspeakers that I had for about a year. Those also sounded quite big, quite enveloping, but these ones are slightly faster sounding, so more impressive in the transient response, and also clearer, more detailed sounding. With S400, everything was about mid-range presence, all about bass, while rolling off parts of the upper treble, while UNO are offering more details up top and anywhere else in the frequency response. In terms of transient response, speed and decay, many loudspeakers are using very different materials in their diaphragms, but in my own experience, only very rigid drivers, very stiff drivers, as metallic ones, were unlocking the fifth gear when it comes to speedy dynamics. And there is a strong reason I've stopped at those CAF reference-free loudspeakers that you see behind me that are using metallic drivers. as they just simply fully satisfied my lust for lightning quick transients. So Crescendo UNO right here is using ceramic/aluminum driver, so woofers and tweeters, both parts, and that is telling me one thing. So they have very stiff drivers, very rigid drivers. Feed them just enough current and be prepared to be punched over and over again in the chest. When my electronica music started playing, I felt them very snappy sounding, so they just keep going and going, so never losing a beat. What's more interesting is that with few tracks, even sub-bass made an appearance in my tracks, so it was going down, reaching easily 40-35 Hz, and I cannot ask for more from a loudspeaker of this size. Those passive radiators on their back improved their low-end delivery quite a lot, and that was very apparent from the first seconds of pressing play. Although they sounded great out of many amplifiers, I believe that 2 AHB2 put in mono mode was something else entirely, so that made them really explosive sounding at times, so hitting my body with a higher energy than usual. It was a very engaging and toy tapping experience. As for Soundstage Depth, I still remember as it was yesterday when I've exchanged several bookshelf loudspeakers with a pair of Buchard S400 that also had passive radiators on the back, and just experiencing music from a different point of view. So those weren't really frontal sounding, and those weren't bolting me to a very defined sweet spot on my couch, so I could easily move around and get exactly the same experience. While all my past loudspeakers sounded like I had single player experiences, S400 were ready to play music for a pack of music-loving friends, just transforming a very personal experience into a social activity in a way. So Crescendo UNO is very much the same, so I'm having a very strong sense of deja vu with them because they are just supplementing the air in the room, they're adding more air and always striving to sound bigger to the actual size. UNO sounded like I've exchanged them with a pair of medium-sized stand floor loudspeakers, just improving the scale and the final picture that I was looking at. I could easily pinpoint the location of any notes around me, and I didn't need to close my eyes for that to happen. And needless to say, UNOs are extremely good when it comes to spatial cues, depth formation, and scale on all axes. Moving on to detail retrieval and transparency, I still remember when I powered them on for the first time around 3 weeks ago, I believe, and just experiencing a very detailed-oriented sound, as they were just considerably clearer sounding and more transparent to my past experiences with bookshelves. And when I was exchanging amplifiers and just finding the best match for them, they were just exposing their nature and just ranking them all. So this was just okay, this was much better, this was outstanding, and that was just ultimate amplifier. And it isn't a secret to anyone that Benchmark AHB2 was the cleanest sounding and the most detailed amplifier out of them all. So if you are searching for a super warm, very seducing type of sound, so super dense type of sound, very smooth sound, then they cannot do that. They will not sugarcoat your music, they will not change it in any way. They will deliver only the truth and everything that is tied to it. Looking behind all my past experiences with bookshelf loudspeakers, these definitely sounded slightly clearer, slightly more transparent to them all, and I can always count on the ability to show me everything that is happening behind my tracks, so they offered me a little bit more information. And yes, I find them slightly more detailed to my former bookshelf loudspeakers, but they didn't add a fake sharpness filter all over that treble, so they weren't really nasty sounding in the treble. I didn't find them bright, or they didn't add any kind of listening fatigue. So in my opinion, they are approaching pretty closely the sound, the transparency and detail retrieval of my KF Reference 3, but aren't really surpassing them, so those are still reigning supreme. And overall, UNO performed exactly how I would describe a detailed and transparent sounding speaker without going overboard to the clinical side of things. Moving on to frequency response, while their mid-range and treble performance aren't really influenced by the amplifier that is driving them, their low-end delivery, their bass, is directly tied to the amplifier or amplifiers in my case. So two Benchmark HB2 transformed them into something else. They were going much faster, much more impactful in the bass, so much so that I would never use a passive subwoofer, an active subwoofer with them for the best results. So the bass was just rumbling, it was going in and out very fast, it was decaying naturally, just underlying that I'm dealing with a high quality type of bass. So their passive radiator on the back, I believe that improved their oomph, their fullness, but it never added distortion or muddiness. Only on very rare occasions I wanted them to go lower to 25 or 30 Hz, but you really can have them all in a loudspeaker of this size. As for mid-range, these guys went with a reference tuning, so you won't find a lot of sweetness, smoothness, meat on the bone that they cannot do, but there is enough mid-range presence that fully preserves the human pitch. Musical instruments also carried plenty of emotions. I could easily feel their bodies, their wooden bodies, their metallic bodies. String-based instruments also vibrated nicely, but not too long because they have pretty fast decays. I felt some authority with male voices and some sweetness with female voices, highlighting that Uno can still show the beauty of their natural overtones. Still, you won't find a lot of that bolder and fuller mid-range performance because Sound of Eden believes in good old linearity. While I can nitpick a little bit about the linear mid-range performance, I'm glad that they didn't mess around with the treble and left it as it is, so super flat, without any kind of rises, drops, nothing like that. I find it extended in the treble, so going past top octave, past 16 kHz, there is plenty of information to be heard, but you will never experience brightness, harshness, listening fatigue. They don't have any of that. So if you consider yourself a treble head, then I believe they will cover your needs in full without showing you some listening fatigue or brightness. So I've drummed some long time ago, and my right foot always twitches when I'm listening to double drums. And I believe with double drums, with cymbals, tambourines, snare drum hits, all that, they did just a marvelous job. They sounded very natural in a way, so very close to the real thing, and I believe they do treble very well. Wrapping things up, I really don't like promoting things that don't deserve my attention, but in my opinion, Crescendo UNO are worth their asking price in full. Would you like them? Well, that's a very easy question, and I'll offer you an easy answer. If you love your bass playful and impactful, your mid-range honest and clean sounding, and also your trebles detailed and transparent without being offensive, all while being surrounded by layers of music, then this is a very easy recommendation to make. At 2,200 euros, they are quite expensive, but I've partnered with their distributor and prepared a 10% discount off for you. Please at checkout use Let's Hit Some Eardrums discount code for a 10% off. But please hurry up as only 10 pairs are being discounted. Okay guys, this is pretty much it. My full in-depth review can be found on my website. In case you want to support this channel, please subscribe to it, and as usual, listen to my music. Be positive, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!